Okay, here we go. Welcome to another edition of the Dal Niente Fellow Travelers podcast. I'm here with composer, scholar, computer musician, improviser, recovering trombone player, George Lewis, who is the Edwin H. Case Professor of American Music at Columbia University. He's also, there's a long laundry list of other things that he is. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science, a corresponding fellow of the British Academy. He was a MacArthur Fellow in 2002, the so-called Genius Grant, a Guggenheim Fellow in 2015, United States Artist Walker Fellowship in 2011, and an Alpert Awards in the Arts winner in 1999. His work has been performed by a long laundry list of ensembles and orchestras, including the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, the London Philharmonia, the Radio Symphony Orchestra Stuttgart, the Mivas Quartet, Boston Modern Orchestra Project, London Sinfonietta, Spectral Quartet, Talia Ensemble, Ensemble Dal Niente, and I'll stop there. Long list of ensembles with which he's worked. He's the author of A Power Stronger Than Itself, the AACM and American Experimental Music, this book here. We actually have two copies in our household. We have one paperback
Wow.
and one hardback. So we're the real thing over here. And he's been a member of that organization since 1971, and studied composition with its founder Muhal Richard Abrams and trombone with Dean Hay. So George, welcome to the podcast. It's just always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for being
Thank,
here.
thanks, Michael. It's great to be here. It's great to be with you and to see you over this long distance phone line or Zoom or whatever it is. It's great.
Yeah, I'm glad we could get you a good connection from outer space there.
He's talking about my virtual background. I realize that I'm now too old to go into outer space, so at least with the Zoom background, I can put myself in front of the space shuttle or the ship from Interstellar or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm. Had that always been a dream of yours to go to outer space?
Oh yeah, family. We're all Trekkies. My dad, my sister, we were all into that. My dad was a you know he was an electronics person.
Oh,
So
okay.
so that was an early interest of all of ours, and we still watch technological stuff, shows about robots and all that. It's a theme in the family.
Mm, okay. Was your dad interested in building spaceships, or was interested in anything like that?
Nobody did fix TVs. He fixed everybody's televisions, and he had various sort of. Back then, the televisions were all tubes, so they were kind of easy to fix.
Mm.
In fact, he made me feel that I could probably do it. Because he had these tube checkers. He said, "Well, take this tube out and put it into the checker, and then check the manual to see which kind of tube it is and which socket to put it in, and now just see if it works." So he said, "I say, well, this tube looks good." He said, "Okay, do the next one." We go like that. Or then you just had to remember not to touch the cathode ray tube because that had 27,000 volts and you get a bad shock. So
That's probably it.
stuff like that. So you learn to respect early on.
Sure. Wow. Okay. Didn't expect us to start out with television repair, but as good a place as any to start. Let's Can we pivot hardcore to music for a second?
Well, sure, but
Um,
we'll go back to this eventually because this whole thing relates to electronic music. So we can actually go straight from that to um, electronics. I
yeah,
mean,
please.
because I guess that's one of the things I've been doing for a long time. The computer music and the electronic music and stuff. And I sort of began, uh, well, at first when I became a part of the ACM in '71, I continued to have this sort of tech orientation. So I was still more or less in college. So I bought a stereo cassette machine, one of the early ones around '71, and
Hmm.
and I didn't have much money, so I found a schematic in a magazine to make a homemade mixer that I could take along with me. Just a simple kind of resistance mixer. And I recorded tons of concerts with that, like multi-microphone concerts, which I still have a lot of these recordings of a lot of the AACM concerts I participated in. If you
Wow.
want to, I can play you one of them.
Oh,
Uh,
wild, please.
Pretty cool one later if you want, because that
Yeah, sure.
I did this for years. A lot of early concerts, um, and then later when I met people like through Anthony Braxton, people like Richard Teitelbaum, and David Behrman, the late Richard Teitelbaum. God, it's such a, I can't believe he's gone. I just can't, you think everybody's going to be around forever.
Yeah.
And all left us. Richard, I mean, he's a major mentors of mine. And David Behrman is still around. And you know, um, so when I started doing computer music, it was sort of under his guidance, not formally.
Mhm.
There was just a group, it was just a group of artists, who were working with these single board microcomputers to try to create music. And so we all got these things called Kim ones. This is all stuff that a lot of people know about. Even I wrote about it in an article about Rich Gold, who was one of the early people in the League of Automatic Music Composers, which was a Bay Area group that was doing like early networked computing, where the computers would actually create the music by themselves without human intervention,
Okay, without humor.
which is kind of what I do, but that's where it came from. But in any event, they were all builders. And David was building his own circuits. It's coming out of that scene with Gordon Muma, David Behrman, David Tudor, the people that built their own circuits and used them with, Merce, Cunningham, and in their own projects. So, and a lot of times the circuit diagram was the real score. Um, so when I started doing it, they said, well, you should get one of these Kim One computers. So you had to order it. You ordered it mail order. It was $250. It came in a
Mm.
single board and three huge manuals, which are written for engineers. You know,
Wow.
the word byte was not in the dictionary, so you had to so you had to like what are they talking about? This byte is 8 bits. What the hell does that mean? So so at a certain, but then it starts right away when you
Mhm.
sort of like this. There was a programming manual where they told you about you had to program in machine code, assembly language, like bits and bytes and stuff,
Mhm.
and with load A with the accumulator and all this kind of stuff, and then you had to build the power supply. It didn't come with the power supply. You had to build that. So, and they had a suggested schematic. So I looked at the schematic and said, how am I going to build a power supply? I've never done this. So I looked at this schematic and suddenly I realized I know what this says. Because like going back to my dad telling me about, these lectures, I'm 5 years old, he's saying, well, he didn't have anybody to talk to about this stuff.
Uh-huh.
So he would just start talking about Ohm's law for no particular reason. E equals IR. Why do I know this? I realized this was it. So I could I knew what a capacitor was, I knew what a resistor was, I knew what a diode was just from talking to him. So, and then, you get a couple of books, like they had these Radio Shack books back then. And before I knew it, I had the thing built and I hooked it up. And every minute I would call David and say, I think it's working. My voltmeter says it's 5 volts steady. You think it's going to go? He said, well, yeah. So just make sure you plug it into the right area. So I got it to working. The thing turned on. And then I ran the sample program, which was like, not Hello World. It wasn't quite that sophisticated. And then at that point, I called him up again in 5 minutes. I said, well, David, okay, I got it working. Now, how do you make music with it? I think his response was something like, well, that's your problem. I mean, he would say it much more elegantly than that. But that was the essential thing. And so you just
Mhm.
had to figure out how to make the thing do music. And from that point, that was where I started really with that.
And what year was that? Is that early 70s?
This would have been 78.
Okay.
After the thing was, after visiting the Bay Area, Jacques Bekaert, who is something we all know, the Belgian composer and journalist who studied with Henri Pousseur, and he made all these pieces, and he was a journalist in Cambodia and Malta and all these places. He just published a memoir of his life,
Mhm.
and so I went to the Bay Area with him and stayed at David's house, and Frederic Rzewski was around, and Blue Jean Tyranny, and members of the league like Rich Gold, John Bischoff, and so I went to some rehearsals with them, and I went to a rehearsal, and they were just sitting there, and the computers were playing all the music.
Mm.
I said, well, wow, this is amazing. This sounds like people improvising, because we had just had this quartet with Douglas Ewart, Walter Bowden, and James Johnson. It was called Quadrasect. It was a
Mm,
quartet, like a wind quartet,
mm.
and it sounded like what we were doing.
Wild.
So I said, well, I got to get one of these. This is
Yeah.
amazing. If you can do this, really? And I never thought, well, wow, I couldn't do this, or this is going to be difficult, or how do you do this? It looks daunting, the kind of stuff, you know. But I never imagined that it would be. I mean, it was hard,
Yeah.
but I never imagined it would be something I wouldn't be able to do.
That I mean, I think that's pretty characteristic of your approach to things, I think. What so let me ask, I don't think I know what's your like what is your earliest electronic composition, or what's your earliest program, your earliest improvising program?
Wow, that I was trying to do musical electronics before that. Like the old record from 1978 called The Imaginary Suite,
Mm,
or a record like these are records because they're really literally vinyl records.
mm,
Chicago Slow Dance. They were live performances, and I was using my same homemade resistance mixer, and uh, it was hooked up to cassette machines. In New York City, you could go to Canal Street at the time, downtown. You could get like there were electronics shops, so you could buy
mm,
resistors, capacitors, circuit boards, solder, all that. But you could also buy these little cheap cassette machines, which were useful one because that was how you saved data for the Kim 1 computers. You saved
mm,
data onto cassettes. And then the other one, they were useful to, because you could buy endless loop cassettes and you'd record on those, field recordings, concrete sounds, whatever you wanted. I had a Moog synthesizer, a very cheap one, and I would make endless loop cassettes. And then the when you listen to Chicago Slow Dance, what you're hearing is like 4 or 5 endless loop cassettes mixed together to create these loops. And that's the kind of thing I was doing before starting to work with computer programs. In the around '79 was when the first one was the Kim and I. That's a recording for the kitchen. The kitchen recorded that, so that's on some CD now
mm,
from 1979. It was done at New Music New York,
mm.
that sort of famous festival. Anyway, so yeah, that's when I started with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, your work with electronics has like developed in incredible and unpredictable ways. I think, I mean, one of my favorite pieces of yours is the work that you wrote for Seth Parker Woods, the cellist.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that Not Alone for
Not alone.
that series of pieces for spatialized multi-channel electronics,
Mm,
and there's a series of them. You know, by that time, I've almost stopped programming because uh, Damon Holsborn, who was my former undergraduate and graduate student, and now kind of an associate collaborator. I mean, he built all that stuff, and so he built the software for those pieces, and I wrote the music, and then I can program the software to basically write music on the patch.
mm, mm.
So, but I was going to say that takes, I mean, that jumps ahead to
That
20,
might be, yeah.
that jumps ahead to 2014.
Mhm.
So if we jump back suddenly to 1978 or 1980, doing like drone music and minimalist music, working with Richard Teitelbaum. One record that a lot of people liked apparently was Homage to Charles Parker, and that was a sort of a minimalist piece, and a lot of it was kind of working out influences. Like I've been going to Lamont Young concerts and
Mm,
listening to well-tuned piano, or doing threshold music with Richard Teitelbaum in these lofts, or listening to David Behrman on the Other Ocean, which is which is such a great piece. In fact, I got that was our wedding march, me and Mia Masaoka, and David Behrman's On the Other Ocean. I mean, it's like minimalism with computers, and it was a very simple thing where there were these six pitches. He had these tune filters like a pitch follower, and then the two musicians, Arthur Stidful and Maggie Payne. Our Stidful played bassoon and Maggie Payne playing flute. We were just improvising slowly along with the electronics, and it was like it was amazing, elegiac, these sort of amazing sounds. And so I was kind of used to all that. And so, and then the other thing was like microphony eins und zwei. So when you listen to homage, if you listen to Homage to Charles Parker, the first part where we took these cymbals and we mic'd them up with contact mics, and Douglas and I, Douglas Ewart was playing the cymbals, and I had like these electroharmonics flangers, analog, electronics and digital analog delays and all that, real cheap stuff. If you knew this stuff, the small stone or the big muff or these kinds of things, electroharmonic stuff. And so we were using that and with the mixers to create the sounds. And then the last part was Richard on the polymode and Douglas playing the part of Charlie Parker and Anthony Davis. So yeah, that was before I started doing computers, or around the same time. I guess 1980, 79. It's all kind of around the same time, I guess. But that was, I mean, now 2014. That's quite a long time later.
Sure. Yeah. Well, 'cause, I mean, you said it was like that was somehow a process of like working out influences. Can you say what the result of that was? I mean, how did that?
Well, I guess you'd have to hear it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's something we could play a bit of. Maybe either, we could play a bit of at some point.
Sure.
Um, but I would say that I tend to think about influences all the time. In other words, there's always some inspiration behind the pieces I write. There are multiple. It's sort of almost like sampling. Like I'll take something and something I heard and sort of transmogrify it into something else. And then, I think I heard someone say, maybe it was Henry Threadgill, say, you don't want to hear the sources. You want to
Okay.
just have it so that we don't really know what the sources are. Um, and so I'd have to tell you what they were. It
Wow.
wouldn't be something, hopefully it wouldn't be something where you say, oh, that sounds like so and so. But if you point out any part in any piece of mine, I can say, well, this reminds me of this person I was thinking about, or this music I was thinking about, you know.
Well, I mean, that is very interesting. I mean, I don't think I've ever, obviously, I've heard you talk a lot about, I mean, all the stuff you've read, all the music you know. Um, so, obviously you have influences and you have quite a lot of them because you know so much stuff. But I don't think I've ever heard you talk about the process of being influenced. And I certainly, when I listen to, I can't think of any piece of yours where when I listen to it, I'm like, oh, George is just doing the thing that, Stockhausen did, that's obviously not how your music comes across as extremely, you know, unique and individual in its voice. I mean, the only thing that I really know is there's the Roscoe Mitchell lick in Assemblage that we play, but I only know that
A
because
deliberate
we've talked about it.
homage.
Right, exactly. Exactly, a deliberate homage. So that's not a sort of concealed reference or anything like that. So I mean, can you I mean, are there particular examples you can point to or want to talk about, or are they too pervasive to even
Well,
get
or
get
you
into?
or you could ask me. You could say, "Well, where does this part come from?" I might be able to tell you.
Oh, okay. Let's like how. Okay, let's do that. Let's play that game for a second. So the flexitone lick that happens in like assemblage and it happens in hexis and
Oh
mimosis, I
yeah, a
think,
lot of different
in
places.
a lot of different places. It's just like and maybe
It's a theremin.
okay. Okay, there you go.
And so the thing was, you could see this. You've probably seen this video by now. We all went out to Theremin's house in '91. It's on
It's in
YouTube.
Moscow, yeah.
Yeah, we went there because we were there. Me, Paul Lansky, and John Chowning somehow under the influence of Todd Mackover, who convinced Sarah Caldwell, of all people, to send us to the Soviet Union for 2 weeks.
I was going to say, how did you end up in the Soviet Union
Well, that was how it
in
happened.
late 70s?
That's one thing, and
Yeah.
you know about this because it turned out that well, we'll get to that
We'll
point.
get to that, yeah.
And so we were there. We were there in Saratov for a week and a half, and then a few days in Moscow. We did concerts of computer music, including versions of Voyager, performed on the Atari ST series of computers, and walked around and understood things. And then we got to Moscow. The composer Vladimir Komarov got in touch and said, "Well, why don't we all go out to Professor Theremin's house?" And I think John said, "Is he still alive?" You know. Turned out, yes, he was, and we all went out to his house. And so we got to see him and meet him and talk to him. And it's all on YouTube. You can find it. It's called Leon Theremin Moscow 1991 for those who want to search for that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Wow, yeah. You can play the blues Bravo, bravo.
And his daughter was playing the theremin, and he was playing. We all tried to play, and we talked about different things. We found out that we didn't know anything about theremin, nothing. We didn't know that he had been, well, maybe John or Paul knew, but I didn't know that he'd been the toast of New York in the 20s, and that he had married an African-American choreographer, Lavinia Williams. We didn't know about that until he asked us about her in the interview. And I'm glad I didn't know that she had passed away in 75. So this is 91, because it would have been terrible. Oh, she passed, because she never remarried, as it turned out. And it also turned out that the probable way in which they met was, one probable method was, I was in jazz archives at Rutgers. They had the James P. Johnson archives. So I looked in the James P. Johnson archives. I saw there were these heartbreaking letters. He was writing all these letters because he started writing like classical music, like orchestral pieces and chamber music. No one wanted to play that, but they sounded great. And now there's a recording of it called Victory Stride. But back then, no, he was just, tried to write all these famous people, trying to get Guggenheims. Nobody was interested. So he couldn't break in because he was too tainted by being the stride piano guy and the inventor of the Charleston. So the Charleston, probably what he did was he used a lot of his Charleston money to bankroll his own concerts. So in one of the programs for the concert, it said, Lavinia Williams dance, Leon Theremin sound. I'm trying to think, James P. Johnson, Leon Theremin, Lavinia Williams. That would have been a great thing to see. I mean, it wasn't in the movie they made. None of that, But that was the thing. And the movie what they made, Theremin Electronic Odyssey, that was made when John Chowning, who was at Stanford, got some funds to bring Theremin to the U.S. And so he met the filmmakers, and that's how they made the film. And so that was much, much later.
Well, you should write a piece that's a reimagining of that performance. I mean, like with Mersin Baby or something like that.
Well, Mersin Baby, that's another one. See, that's a perfect example. You just played that. I've been doing in like 2007, 2008. John King uh, organized it so that I could become part of playing the Merce Cunningham events, which was wonderful because, a lot of what I do is based on having known the people in some way personally, not having read about in a book or anything like that, and then I've read the books later, but which, which is nice because then it provides a check on. That's how I know that there's a public and a private transcript about everything. And most of the writing presents the public transcript and never presents anything else. Like they say, well, John Cage wasn't interested in improvisation. That's the public transcript. The private transcript is very different. So at a certain point, you don't get caught up in these binaries in oppositions about who's doing what and being opposed to this and being opposed to that. You just kind of accept and absorb and learn and transform. So there I was playing the events at Dia Beacon. That was where the incredible performance, and I did some others. The Joyce played, Takisa Kosugi, Marina Rosenfeld, David Behrman, John King, and so on. Sometimes we did them with Fast Forward, all kinds of people. Anyway, for Merce, I think it was his birthday or something, and people were celebrating, but at a certain point he was all by himself, and I'd done several of these things. I'd never gotten a chance to talk to him, really, so I just went up and talked to him. I said, so happy birthday, and how's it going? He said, instead of going with that, he said, well, George, I didn't feel the same way about improvisation as John.
He just cut straight to he knew the questions you had.
Yeah, I mean,
he read the 95 article and he said, okay, I got some stuff to talk to this guy about.
Well, that's what frightened me, that a lot of people thought it was 96.
96,
article,
okay.
the afrological, urological article, was an attack on Cage, which it really wasn't. It was an attack on the people who used Cage to bash Afro-American, improvising music. So it was sort of a way of recontextualizing that. I mean, to show that, and to sort of free those people from that sort of baleful binary of the Afro-Euro getting caught in all that, and somehow because they were doing it on their side, they couldn't acknowledge the other people. So it was trying to free everybody up to be who they
I like the way you put that. That's good. It's a way of freeing people from a baleful binary. That's great.
Yeah. So anyway, so I said, well, what do you mean, Merce? He said, well, maybe you know about the concert I did with Baby Dodds, being the canonical, the player who, one of the great trap drummers, the early trap drummers. He was innovator on the instrument. He did all this work with Louis Armstrong and everybody, And so I'm wondering, wow, what must that have been like? And the other thing I started to wonder then, which was, how come I'd never read about this in any of the books on experimental music, which by that time I was, 2008, I'd been writing scholarly articles on this, but I'd never read about this particular collaboration. And it turned out it was in just two places. David Vaughan, who was Merce's biographer, wrote about it, and Baby Dodds wrote about it in his memoirs. Talked about this guy, Merce Cunningham, and he came to see me. He said, I want to play with you. He said, well, I don't know what you want to do. And he said, play something. So I played something. I said, that's what I want. So I'm back with Merce, and I'm saying, well, wow, what happened there, And he said, well, we couldn't get Baby to stop accompanying us.
Okay, yeah.
So, and then I found out later that this concert took place in 1946. And at that time, I guess they were already into this idea that they wanted to have the music and the dance be separate.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and it was all kinds of things connected with that. When I started to look into the concert, the piece was called Fast Blues. I think it was Cage and maybe Maro Ajemian, maybe. They might have played a 2-piano transcription of Satie's Socrate. And so in Socrate, that piece becomes later the basis for the cheap imitation because they weren't allowed to use that. The Satie estate wouldn't allow them to use that. So Merce and Baby, to get finally back around to that, is a depiction of all these elements. There are 3 dancers plus the trap drummer, which Kyle did a fantastic job on. Dal Niente is really amazing. And And so, and then there's a part of it which is sort of a cheap imitation of Cage's cheap imitation.
A doubly cheap imitation. Does that
Right.
make it expensive somehow?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, who knows? I hope I don't get sued. But see, that's a great example of what you try to build into the piece. There are no direct sources of depiction, and nobody would pick that out. But if you read
Right.
the program notes, and there are these sources, and once it becomes clear, but that provides the means for me to create the music. And I was talking to someone just the other day who was saying I really need a source of inspiration in order to write something. That might have been Courtney Bryan, or was it
Mm.
her? Somebody who said they really needed a source of inspiration in order to write.
I mean, she doesn't seem to be lacking sources of inspiration.
No,
Um,
because she's voracious.
yeah.
She looks everywhere. So
I mean, yeah, like just the orchestra piece of hers that I've conducted, Sanctum, that piece is just like, I mean, it's, you know, it comes across, I mean, like, I actually tried my best to like chase down all the references and all the like, she quotes this sermon here and she quotes, she quotes this bit of this recording here and like this is this part from this like this is this part from this video clip and it's so it has actually maybe I mean because I know she worked with you I mean so there's obviously some affinity there but it does feel like encyclopedic and yeah not there's no fat there's no sort of excess. It feels like she's processed a bunch of information and sort of made it into a sort of quasi tone poem. Is the thing that occurred to me. But yeah,
yeah,
she doesn't seem to be lacking in inspiration.
no, and she's a person who is has been able to connect sacred music with the secular in some
Mm.
very interesting ways that are sort of innovative ways, including the use of electronics. She took my interactive electronics class. So, and she built some sort of interesting video electronics interactive, uh, you know, interface. So, using Max MSP. So,
Mm.
I mean, I've had a lot of fantastic students. I hate to single people out, but I've had a lot of fantastic students, both the composers and the theorists, that I work with at UCSD and then at Columbia. So, that's amazing. I don't know. I'm amazed at what they've turned out and how they've done things.
Yeah, no, I mean that's I can I can attest to that being a factual statement. That's not just proud teacher moment. That's like you have had some truly fantastic students.
Well, like you've been playing on Andile Khumalo's work a lot, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Andile Khumalo is an amazing composer. We're both fans of. He worked with you in early 2000s or
He got
2010s.
his degree in 2013.
Okay.
And he also studied with Tristan Mirai, and before that, he studied in Germany. He's a very well-trained composer. He's a Zulu origin from Johannesburg, and now he's there. He has a job as the co-deputy head of school at Wits University,
Mm.
and I'm hoping to visit him there at some point. And we're also hoping to bring him to the U.S. next year, and also to Germany, where we have this very interesting project around Afro-diasporic composition,
Mm.
which we're trying to do. But someone like that is a perfect example of someone who's synthesized a lot of influences, who's very voraciously multicultural, diverse, and he actually had a piece performed at Darmstadt in 2008, one of two Afro-diasporic composers, or three if you count Kevin Volans. But
Oh,
of the
wow.
black ones,
Yeah, right.
there's only him and Alvin Singleton. Singleton in '73 and Andile in 2008, I think it was.
So I'd just be
And
curious. I mean,
then me in 2018.
then you finally. I mean, I'd be curious to know. I mean, Singleton strikes me as like an unobvious choice. I mean, and just I'd love to hear any thoughts you have on this. I mean, like it seems to me that like okay, a composer like Anthony Braxton,
Mhm.
a composer like Roscoe Mitchell, have been composing for a very long time. Obviously, Braxton has compositions that number in the hundreds, like literally number in the hundreds. It
Yeah.
seems to me that a lot of what he does is consonant with and sort of the Euro class, so-called Euro new music, Neue Musik. It's surprising to me that someone like Braxton was never played at Darmstadt, has not been played at Darmstadt, as far as I know.
Well, it's very complicated, but if you go in that direction, the list is very long.
Indeed.
Tanya Leone or Braxton or all, Ollie Wilson, all kinds of people. Um, but Alvin, and it's particularly odd with Alvin because Alvin, he won the Kronick-Steiner Prize.
Right, right.
That's the major award at
Yeah.
Darmstadt for his piece. I think it was a trio piece. And he studied Goffredo Petrassi, he was at Yale. I met him at Yale. I was an undergraduate and I was a roommate with Miles Hoffman, the violinist and violist, and he was roommates with him.
Wait, the guy who's like he's the host of Performance Today on NPR?
I guess so. If
That
it's
guy?
him. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He's a great
Am I
guy.
thinking of the right guy? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds like a great guy on the radio.
yeah, Mike. Miles Hoffman he was wonderful. He's a great player, and yeah. So anyway, he was and a very affable host later, and very knowledgeable. And we were roommates in freshman year. And so he was playing with the Yale Symphony. And one day he said, "Well, this is a very unusual piece that you should come and hear." And I said, "Okay, wow," 'cause I hadn't been, so I went there, and then it was a very unusual piece. It was called Mestizo 2. So it would have been around 71 or 70 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the composer comes out, and it's a black guy. And I said, "Wow." So I decided I had to meet this guy, and that's how I met Alvin Singleton. He was a graduate student. He was getting his DMA, which he ended up not really getting, because they have some weird thing about Yale about distinguishing yourself. I mean, nobody's more distinguished than Alvin. It's ridiculous. So, in any event,
Yeah.
and then I visited him in Graz. He was living there, and later in the 70s, and we've kept up ever since. So, but he's like a major figure, and we just got his papers to come to Columbia now. So, I mean, he's one of the major African American composers of the century. So,
Yeah,
or one of the major composers, really.
yeah. Just
As
want
far as I'm
to.
concerned, for me, period of the century.
I mean, I think we can not qualify it and just say one of the major composers.
Well, it's important to say that they're African American because if you look at a guy like George Walker, who was the first African American to get the Pulitzer, he said it didn't make any real difference in his commissions or performances. Even that kind of a major thing. I mean,
Yeah.
no one seemed to see that as making any difference. So there was a kind of investment in sort of precarity and invisibility there, which I'm sure everyone experienced, all the black composers experienced,
An investment in precarity.
and a disinvest and invisibility,
Yeah.
investment in visibility. So you see what's happened with Julius Eastman,
Sure.
for example. I mean, he went through that as well, and now that he's passed away, and now, was it 20 years later or whatever, people are saying, "Wow, Julius Eastman." So we like for these people to become known while they're around. And it's also that you see this kind of thing as being a worldwide commitment to the possibility of changing classical music and who's considered a subject in the discourse.
Right.
To not have to not have the repetition of the same people as being the privileged ones, and to see that if we're missing the Afro-diasporic part of the music, we're missing something that, for musical reasons, it impoverishes the understanding of the music if you don't have those people, if you don't know their work, or if you're not being performed or whatever. It's not a Coles to Newcastle kind of thing. It really is something where we're missing a lot if we don't hear from Andile or Alvin or Tanya or Hale Smith, and especially after 1960, where there's an incredible explosion of creativity. Talib Rasul Hakim, who you've been thinking about as well, let's see, there are people now. It's incredible. Trevor Weston, Jesse Montgomery. There's a ton of people. So it's time to get those people out there,
Yeah.
and to look at this as being part of what happens when you start to think about it. It's beyond diversity. It's into just bringing everyone together so we can see the contribution that everyone has made, and so we can have the cross-fertilization where everyone learns from being around a vastly enriched creative and cultural environment.
Right. You do. I mean, occasionally I do hear you make, like, a word you'll use occasionally is intersectionality.
Yeah.
I assume you mean that in the kind of like Kimberly Crenshaw kind of just the basic bell hooks kind of way. I think I don't know, just in my limited experience, I think this is an underutilized concept in music specifically. It seems to me. It seems like maybe like literature, popular, criticism of pop culture, uses the concept of intersectionality like a little more than we do in music, but maybe I'm just reading the wrong people.
Well, it comes from the critical legal fraternity or community, not fraternity. It comes from the critical legal community. And Kimberly Crenshaw, that is her background. And there's always been a strong interest in music there. So in a way, it filters into music from the legal community that was very interested in, especially black music and improvised music. Cheryl I. Harris, one of the major legal theorists, who's at UCLA. I mean, she is a board member of the AACM. She went to all the concerts, and she married the South African poet Willie Karapetse Kotsisile, and their son is Earl Sweatshirt. So there's all kinds of connections with music there, and so in an intersectional way. But certainly in terms of the discourses surrounding, the academic discourses surrounding music, especially classical music, there's a lot of work to be done. Certainly around gender, sexuality, but probably the more glaring issue is when they don't talk well about race, or race is more indigestible right now than the gender discourses. And so that's something that is getting done. It's coming to fruition, and there are newer generations of scholars, newer generations of institutional people, curators, music directors, composers, orchestras, ensembles that are thinking in these ways, like your ensemble Dal Niente or ICE or Italia or some of the others as well. London Sinfonietta, South Bank, they're all trying these kinds of new things. So I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
I have to be optimistic because I saw where it was.
It's like if you weren't optimistic, then what in the world could one be?
Well, I come from the Mulholland Abrams School of Optimism. In fact, he wrote a piece we played called Optimism. I don't remember how it went, but it was, you have to be optimistic because you see where you came from. It's one of those, I don't know where we're going, but it's showing where we've been, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I guess, there's this article recently in this book, Seeing Race Again, right?
Is that Tina Kempt?
It's with Kimberly Crenshaw. And,
I see. No.
And she's one of the editors. But there's a chapter in there called I'm trying to read it. The possessive investment in classical music, confronting legacies of white supremacy in U.S. schools and departments of music.
Who wrote that?
This is Lauren Kajiwa.
Lauren Kajikawa. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
This is not. This is the first. This is the first piece like this that I've read in a kind of scholarly kind of context. But of course, I might just be looking in the wrong places. But I'm glad that article finally got written in a scholarly.
Lauren has done majorly important work. I don't know that particular piece, but of course the title of it comes from George Lipsitz's the labor historian's work and popular music theorist and chronicler George Lipsitz, who wrote a famous book called The Possessive Investment in Whiteness: How White People Profit from Identity Politics.
Sure.
And I worked with George at UCSD. And he was a colleague there, and he wrote incredible books. He wrote a book about Johnny Otis. He wrote another book called Dangerous Crossroads, in which he interviewed Fela Kuti or something like that, and it was incredible about L.A. And he just finished a new book. He did the foreword with God, who's the other guy? I'm trying to think. It was about Ruben. God, what's this guy? Ruben Funkawatl. I'm trying to get this thing together. It's an amazing book. Ruben, The Confessions of a Radical Chicano doo-wop Singer.
That's a great title.
Yeah, I'm going to find that. Yeah, Chicano doo-wop, and he really was a doo-wop singer. But he was also involved in the Japanese. Yeah, here it is. Ruben Funkawatl Guevara. And he started the actual he was actually a doo-wop singer, and he somehow he got to know Frank Zappa, and Frank Zappa said, well, look, you could be Ruben of Ruben and the Jets. So they started a band called Ruben and the Jets. They made all these records. And then he got involved in things like the Japanese movement, for reparations. He got involved in that movement, one of the Japanese movement activists. So he got to know my brother-in-law, Mark Masaoka, in L.A., who was a part of that movement as well, and his wife, Kathy Masaoka, and they're both involved in that. So he had a pretty long reach. And so that's where music can take you, and that's the kind of thing that George had been doing. So I guess he inspired Lauren to create this article, which I really want to read.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also gives me hope. It gives me reason for optimism as well, since I think this is a thing that one confronts in institutional contexts. Really, it's still around.
Well, a lot of these very cool theorists like George are waiting for classical music to kind of grow up and break out of these sort of self-imposed isolation to start thinking about these things, because they already know the music. I mean, and some of them maybe aren't. After a while, if you don't see real change, you stop following it. So every so often,
sure,
if I'm talking to them or someone else, as we say, there's a lot of new movement out there. People are, you're doing incredible work. You're sort of thinking about, ways of changing the field where you see new kinds of composers, new models of what a composer could be. Like I said, before I saw Alvin up there on the stage at the Yale Symphony, and what was it, Stuckel Hall or whatever hall it was.
Yeah.
I said, well, wow, we can be composers. And that was kind of weird, because I was taking music theory with Lazarus Ekweme. It was like at the time he came to be one of the major sort of musicologists, African music theorists. But I didn't know that. He was just a real hard-nosed guy who was just threatening to fail me all the time if I didn't do better. But I guess that's the reason why he was being hard-nosed. He said, well, I finally have a black student in my class. I got to shape up here. Anthony Davis was there too.
Oh, really? It was in school with you?
Yeah.
Oh, wild.
Yeah.
Man, I just don't, gosh, just,
we had a pretty good crew. Robert Dick was in there, Anthony, Henry Louis Gates, let's see who else. And it turns out Ben Carson was there too. I didn't know.
Oh my gosh, well,
I didn't know him, and I don't remember him. And the New Yorker called me up and said, you must remember Ben Carson. I said, I really don't. So I emailed Skip and I said, was Ben Carson really there? He said, you don't remember? And so it was plausible deniability. No, I don't remember the guy.
Must have blocked it out, which is
Possibly, yeah, 'cause there are a lot of cool people who went there.
Yeah, I was gonna say don't waste your time with the not cool ones.
I mean, Anthony's father was the master of Calhoun College, and
Oh,
then
okay. Of Calhoun College of all
yeah,
things.
and that yeah, right. That was
Hmm.
which they changed the name now to I forget
Recently, right? Yeah,
what they changed it to. I don't remember, but
I don't know.
anyway, and post-abolition kind of name.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I don't know. We're going on and on here, Michael. What
Yeah.
you want to talk to me about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just
I could go on forever with stories and all
yeah,
that.
of course. Well, I mean, I think I don't want to lose the Andile Khumalo thread just since we talked about him. Why don't we? Do you mind if we like listen to just a couple of minutes of his piece "Cry Out"? Because I just love the ending
Yeah.
of it. I just think it's a great piece. I'm going to share my screen here.
All right.
I mean, I just love that. I think that's just such a fabulous ending. It's like it's such a like kind of quirky musical imagination, like it's sort of going along mechanically and everything's sort of fitting in, and then it like and you feel like you have a pretty good sense of just how it's working and what the piece is and like what this is, and then then it stops and it's just like a viola note for and you sort of send or like we could this viola note feels like could go on forever, and then like it returns, then it's the other texture returns, and then it's over. And I think like it's a really creative approach to like proportions, and it's like an unusual juxtaposition. So I think it's just and I don't know where he got any of that. I mean, he obviously got some of it from you, but I mean, what was he like to work with? I mean, and if you have anything to say about what we just listened to, please.
I've as I heard it, it suddenly develops into this sort of mechanical, toy piano-like texture. It doesn't start out that way. It starts
Right.
out kind of disconnected, kind of, and suddenly, all of a sudden, you notice it's locked in.
Yeah, right.
And was it always locked in? I should go back and check it out.
Yeah.
I'm always using, every time I have a cassette machine back in the day, the rewind button always wore out. So, so what was that again? And that's the thing about Andile's music. Is like, what was that? And where did
Yeah,
that come
right,
from?
right,
Where did that come from?
right.
And how did he get there from here? And and he was a very careful. Look, he was a real stickler. I had him as my teaching assistant in undergraduate composition, and he gave the undergraduates fits because he was a super editor. Just like every little part, yes, he was like, you didn't do this, you didn't dot that I. Where's that accent? Where's this and so on? Incredible, and and they weren't really expecting that from him. I don't know why, because he's definitely very meticulous. And that was one of his dissertation pieces.
Mm.
See, the thing is that, Michael, I mean, hearing you play it and hearing you talk about it has caused me to think about his music in a new way. that I hadn't really thought about before because of your sort of incisive way of looking at getting at, maybe it's, I mean, it's the way you operated, getting at the innards of the music and getting at the affect of the music. You know, I've seen you do it with my music, I've seen you do it with a lot of music. And so I found that I've learned as much, maybe more in a way, from having you interact with that music. I've learned a whole new range of ways of thinking about it.
George, that's very kind of you to say. It's well, you know, when you have really great music, it's easy to say something about it, I think, you know. And like he's such a skilled composer that like it's just cool, you know. It's just, I mean, it's also like it's the music that I want to listen to, you know. It's sort of like that's kind of like, you know, I think Dal Niente has a very complicated programming philosophy, of course, or we have a lot of discussions and fights and things like that. But in the end, kind of a lot of what we program is like what we want to listen to, and like that's what that music is. So thank you for introducing me to him.
Well,
I think
what
it's
you
partially
guys
what I
have,
want to say.
you guys have done this thing in Chicago. I mean, I didn't really see it in its full set of capabilities until Augusta Reed Thomas did the Ear Taxi. And suddenly I was seeing like a whole new approach. I mean, I've been with the AACM. We're trying to get traction for new music in various ways. I mean, we had some good concerts, but we also had concerts with like 3 people in the audience, you know. And suddenly I'm seeing like banners all over the downtown area of my hometown saying new music, this and what? And then there you guys were right in the thick of it. And there's a whole new generation of people, and the ASM was also involved with this, and you know, a younger generation, Tamika Reed, and all this. And so we are. It showed me that there was. It gave me a new way to think about my hometown, and it's unfortunate that the COVID situation has caused the cancellation of our May 15th event with Music Now, which was Missy Mazzoli curated, with Tamika Reed and Nicole Mitchell, the first woman to be the chair of the ACM, among other people, and also a performance of a couple of pieces of mine. And but overall, I think that one of the things this has done is you guys and others have been to place Chicago in this incredible position on the new music map.
I mean, I do think a lot of people in this town are coming to realize, you know, what our sort of our generation, I suppose. I mean, I'm now like I'm 41, so I'm not like the young generation by any stretch of the imagination. But even like the ensembles that are a generation younger than me, how much they owe to the work that was being done in Chicago in the 60s and 70s, and that
And then you had Eighth Blackbird later.
Right.
And Ice being around Chicago, and probably others. I don't know them all.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, I think that I am interested in this. You know, there's a quote you sent me this article. Well, I mean, it's a I guess it was a little symposium, and it has an afterword by Anne Schreffler, who sort of and she quotes somewhere in here. I'm going to see if I can find it. She quotes Vijay Iyer as talking about sort of jazz and classical music, those words being like marketing terms, and and overall, what Anne is talking about is this notion of boundaryless and how that still kind of like still reinforces certain problematic characteristics. But I do think that for whatever reason, I don't want to say we feel boundaryless, but I think that. I don't detect them, and with my students, I certainly feel this way as well. With my students, I feel like just a lot less, the people that are 20 years old that are in performance programs, for instance, at DePaul, I feel like a lot less commitment to genre or stake. They don't seem to have as many stakes in genre, and they don't necessarily care that the word classical music is used, or and just because I think the actual like on the ground listening that they do is so kind of is so all over the place. They listen to Spotify, and the Spotify playlist comes up, and they hear this, and they hear George Lewis 1 second, and they hear Beethoven the next second, and they hear Daft Punk the next second. I'm not sure what's your experience like with your composition students. Are they like
with
similar or
Oh yeah, I mean certainly. But I was going to also say, and I was going to ask you, what's that article with Anne? What's it called?
It's the afterword in this boundaries in the new American classical music at the turn of the millennium. It was this
It's a
thing.
book.
No, it was a symposium that Judy Lockhead
Oh,
had.
I just downloaded that
Yeah, yeah,
yesterday,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I hadn't read it. Okay, and
No,
Anne wrote the afterword.
Anne
Okay,
wrote the afterword
I will look
exactly,
for
and she's
that.
got. And I'm trying to look for this quote by Vijay Iyer that I now can't find.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I thought I highlighted everything, but apparently I didn't. So
Well, I should be able to find it because I did download it yesterday. But I
yeah,
mean, but rather than try to look now because
yeah,
I'm always looking for these things, and Zoom makes the computer run so slowly.
yeah. Right.
It's
Classical
something.
and jazz are business terms, explains composer and pianist Vijay Iyer. Merely a convenience set up a long time ago for the marketing of music. I don't want to like. I guess I don't want to go too far with you know. Um, because I think we wouldn't want to market trying like Anne's point is like you don't want to market the idea of boundarylessness because then like some people boundarylessness can be looked at as a privileged thing, you
Right.
know which I think is one of her points, which is a great point. She makes the point that like if you're stopped at the barbed wire borders of Hungary in 2015 or at the U.S. Mexico border in 2018, a refugee from war and hardship is not living in a boundaryless world.
Well, that's true. I mean, the it's a good point, but genre terms are also uh, people are often genre markers have often, and I've sort of written this in a couple of places, often been portrayed as promoting intelligibility and community. But there's also the sense of genre as promoting gatekeeping, creating boundaries, and genre itself is an infrastructure. Genre terms are infrastructure themselves, and different genre terms have different kinds of infrastructures associated with them. This is one of the things that the AACM sought to overcome. Um, so that what I find is that there are a couple of ways to think about this. One is you could try to be post genre, which I think is sort of what you're talking about. My current approach is to sort of expand the boundaries or make them so porous that you don't really know what the limits are. In other words, we should be able to see as far as we can within. For if you're sitting in a chair within some which is designated as some genre, you should be able to see way out the window as far as you can, and you don't know what's coming next. So, and that's the only way to keep it. If you can see the limits, then you're stuck, and you know you're in a prison. That's what you're really in, and it might be a nice gilded prison, and then you want to look for the jailers, and then you sort of take their keys and somehow get rid of them. Um, so I don't know. That's part of the complication with genre for me. And so in thinking about ways to open up genres, it's not just about methodology, it's about subjectivity, because people can use any method or any methodology or draw from anything, or anyone or anywhere. But then we start to find that people get jailed or policed based on race or ethnicity or whatever, in particular gender. They get placed in certain infrastructural insufficiencies. Um, so these are all things that have to be sort of overcome as a means of making sure that whatever genres you would like to be associated with uh, accurately represent the best of who you are. Um,
And can I ask how does what you're talking about now relate to your notion of créolité? Like,
oh yeah, yeah. Uh, I was reading Gayatri Spivak, who's a university professor at Columbia, who's a real music head also,
okay,
and and I think she was a personal friend of Daniel Poor, for example.
okay.
And I ran into her the other day and just talking about these things, and she was talking about her famous article. She was so funny. She said, "Well, I've written this article that a lot of people read. Can the subaltern speak?" I said, "Okay, yeah, I think I've heard of that." Standing on College Walk talking with her, and she was talking about how it was really about listening, not really about speaking. And So, and then she wrote an article called World Systems and the Creole, and the idea about creolity. And it suddenly occurred to me that there were discourses that were in need of, creolization, not along lines of race to be sure, but not in a eugenics kind of way, but in a way of like just we're going to build a new world here, and that world is going to be one in which we have to recognize multiplicities of origins and directions. And then I was able to read the work of Chamoiseau, Patrick Chamoiseau, and Raphael Confiant, and these kind of people, in praise of creolization or creolity, and Éloge de la créolité. And in reading that, I began to see, well, this is something we could really use in terms of music, because they're talking about the reconstruction of a new kind of subject. And so that was something that classical music seemed to me, like contemporary music, sorely needed. So the first time I brought this in was they brought me in, Björn Gottstein, who's the director of Don't Ashing, brought me in to give a talk, and this is the talk I gave. It was about creolization in contemporary music, and I gave examples of how creolized listening, thinking about Louis Andriessen in a very different way, and my ongoing engagement with Johannes Kreidler's work, which is a very important piece, Fremdarbeit, which really brings out, or outsourcing, which really brings creolization to the fore in terms of the construction of the audience, the listening subject, in terms of a piece of new conceptualism that reminded me very much of the work of the famous piece called Couple in the Cage with Guillermo Gomez Peña and Coco Fusco. Same kind of idea of fictive identities.
Yeah, right, because in that piece, they actually literally pretend to be indigenous, some unknown indigenous tribe,
some indigenous tribe,
and people buy it.
People bought it, and in the same way, people bought the idea that Johannes Kreisler had hired somebody from the Central Conservatory for $10 to write his music. So, what kind of person buys into that?
Right.
I mean, somebody who really doesn't realize that Beijing is not really a cultural backwater compared to
Central Conservatory. Yeah, it's produced some composers,
Yeah, I mean, Zhou Long, Pulitzer Prize, Chen Yi. I mean, what do you want? The whole crew, not to mention Shanghai. There's a scene, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was the first time I tried to bring race into what could arguably be considered the mecca, a certain kind of mecca, in using that term deliberately, of contemporary music in the world, especially in Europe. The major European music festival, and it was pretty well received. I expected to have a lot of pushback, and maybe there was in some bar that I didn't hear about, or somebody got mad or something. But I think overall, since that time, I've been able to have other people think about that to the stage where we're able to start thinking about putting on festivals of Afro-diasporic contemporary music in Europe based on this. So the creolization in this case just meant the reconstruction of a new subject for classical music.
Yeah. I mean, I think I found it to be like a really useful and like hopeful concept in the context of like kind of U.S. politics right now, where I think it feels to me like we need a way forward. Music needs a way forward that is. I think as Muhal Richard Abrams would say, I mean that's optimistic, and this feels to me like actually we obviously live in this terrible political environment with run by a bunch of like crazy right-wing people, and our reaction to that is to be appropriately horrified, but the discourse is often so cutting and negative that I found this notion of creolization to be really like actually hopeful and sort of proposing a way forward, a positive set of things we can do maybe.
Well, American new music hasn't really reached the status of let's say, the European variant, which people expect to see at some point and hear at some point in their everyday lives. They expect to hear it even on the major media, where I don't think anyone ever hears advanced, or not advanced, but any kind of unusual new music out there. It's not to say there aren't unusual musics, but we don't tend to hear them. And so that means that we're sort of out of those discourses in a way we don't exist. And so that's a difficult thing for people to swallow. But in a way, that sort of undergroundness of it uh, becomes a way in which we can, a vantage point for being able to advance a critique of the situation we're in, and also not to be sort of taken in by it.
Mm.
So I certainly, if you read Anthony Braxton's three-volume Triaxiom Writings, it's basically that's a very powerful critique of American society and also other societies around the world, the sort of first world sort of ways of thinking. And he points out a lot of the deficits in that way of thinking. Because we have to remember, although we're in the U.S., we operate as musicians, we operate in a global environment. So we have to think of ourselves as being situated
Yeah.
not just in one place. We have to think of ourselves as being in dialogue, in community, and so we have a stake in the outcomes. And once we see that we have a stake in those outcomes, we have a stake in other kinds of outcomes. For example, one can be very concerned with the fact that apparently, according to I read in the paper yesterday that I live in New York, as you know, and we didn't say that, but I do, and apparently at this point, a quarter of the people who live in this city have somehow are infected or something with the COVID-19. That's incredible. So if you walked out the street, which I haven't been out for almost 2 months, I
Oh my
mean,
gosh.
anyone you meet, a quarter of the, like every fourth person you meet, which is not quite as bad as which is not as quite as bad as the 53% of white women who voted for Trump. So over half of the people you meet, but then that's not unusual because except for 1964, apparently the majority of white people have always supported the Republican candidate since I think the Depression.
Mm.
Since before Roosevelt, and then Roosevelt comes along and changes that.
Mm.
But I think that's it. But what you start to see is, well, maybe it's like when David Duke almost got elected governor of Louisiana, and they interviewed some guy, and he said, I just can't believe it. I go to work every day, and I realize that almost half the people I work with every day probably voted for this guy. And so, that makes you very insecure.
Mm.
As you start to see what situation you're really in, and I'm not sure that I don't want to get too political about this because I'm not really much of a commentator there, but I'll just say that I'm having a hard time with the incompetence explanation as to why we're experiencing this massive uptick in deaths and cases and so on. It seems pretty obvious that it's been pretty much proven that the federal government figures ignored the entire situation or made light of it. Whole news networks were dedicated to denying it and so on. I mean, Fox News is like Radio Mille Collines in Rwanda. Responsible for broadcasting, Radio Mille Collines broadcasting genocide every day, kill those Tutsis. I mean, what? So you hear this all the way, oh, there's nothing wrong here, go out and have a good time, So that kind of irresponsibility, and I heard they're having a lawsuit against them at some point. But
Well, and of course, we know who's most affected by the virus, right? We know who's dying overwhelmingly,
yeah, and a lot of people are saying, like,
especially in
well,
Chicago.
what do you mean? Yeah, in Chicago, my hometown, or here, or in Georgia, where the guy said, well, it's okay for nail salons and hairdressers to open up, and some African American Twitter person said, well, don't buy into that. What do you think? Are they trying to kill us deliberately?
Yeah.
Don't go out.
Yeah.
So, at this point, you're in with COINTELPRO or something. So, but it's out in the open. It's not hidden for 20 years and then comes out. It comes out of a book. So all of that is affecting the musical environment, and it's also affecting it could actually affect a lot of things here in New York, like the extent to which people feel that they can't really live here anymore. There's going to be a fallout. Not quite a nuclear fallout, but certainly a kind of fallout where, you don't really know. Anything could happen, and we don't really know. It's a very insecure position to be in around the world. But the difference is here with no working healthcare system of any, no working public health system, unlike a lot of countries. Uh, you know, if you think it like, let's stop here because I don't want to turn this to, in fact, you can cut a lot of this if you like. But when Trump made the remark about, people injecting disinfectant and stuff like that, and a lot of people went ahead and did that. Well, those people weren't expecting to go to the doctor because they didn't have a healthcare system.
Right.
So I mean, like, what do? You do self-surgery, you avoid going to the doctor, you try to figure out some other way, you take patent medicines or liniments or whatever you think is going to work, and it's because you can't go to the doctor because it costs too much. And you don't have the money for it. So people are here used to like various forms of self-reliance. And, but in that environment, I mean, you can't imagine that someone as a citizen of a country with a working national health care system would, take bleach. No one's going to do that. They're not expecting to have to do that. Anyway,
George, yeah.
there are other kinds of subjects, and I was going to actually play for you, if you like. And
I'd love that. Let's end on a high note.
Well, yeah, it's a pretty high note. I was going to play this. It's just a little bit of it. Back to we didn't talk about a lot of different kinds of music. We didn't talk about assemblage. A lot of the. And about 10 years ago, I decided I would spend a lot of my time composing for ensembles, because that was one thing where I felt I could learn a lot, and it was going to be, I've done installation pieces, I've done computer music, I've played a lot with a lot of people, and I just decided I wanted to do something else, and I just wanted to see if I could write this music and have it be something that would matter to people, and it turned out maybe that's okay, and that I'm pretty happy about the way it's turned out. But this is here's something. I don't know if this is going to work. It might work. I think I have to share the screen to make it work.
Sounds good.
This is 1976, and the jazz workshop in Boston, and this was probably my first concert, or maybe second concert, with Anthony Braxton, and Muhal was playing, and Dave Holland, Dave Holland was kind of the inspiration for my first computer programs. I wanted them to sound like Dave. And of course they didn't sound anything like Dave, but that was the goal. Okay, I'm going to stop it here. This is Barry Altschul's solo. We don't know how long it's going to go on. This is it. get a little nuts. There.
Wow.
That's a nuts. That's little nuts there.
That's rock and roll, man. Oh
You know,
my gosh.
you can hear Kenny Wheeler because play that same piece, and you know he was a little less sloppy than I was, but you know managed to get through it. And you know it's and you know all those repetitions are all written out, the number of them and everything, and so you have to kind of like you have to kind of keep up. You can't fake it or anything like that. So and Anthony had these different modes of repetition. You know, like, and there was one where it would be this angular thing you had to repeat over and over, like da 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 you had to do stuff like that, you know. So yeah, so it would go on. That would go on for quite some. He called that the Kelvin series.
The Kelvin series. Okay.
And then he had a Kaufman series. And then he had a third series. I forgot the name of it. He probably has. Now he has the Ghost Trance series. And
of course.
Something since then. I don't know what. He continues to be a super creative guy, you know. And these operas, my God, you know.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to do one of those in Chicago sometime.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
George, I mean, I think so. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about assemblage. I think we should probably wrap things up. But we'll play assemblage on the way out. You know, I think how'd that be? But I just, you know, George, it's just, I don't know, man. It's just always a pleasure and a delight. And it's like, speaking of keeping up, you know, it does, like, these conversations that we have sometimes, I feel like they are these like improvisations where you have to like stay ready, and you got to like be ready for this quick turn that way and this quick turn that way, and like you got to write stuff down as fast as you can write it down, and so like I find it just a joy to talk to you for that reason, is it does have a kind of like it feels musical to talk to you in a way. So thank you for sharing of your time and your music so generously. I mean, it's so great. I mean,
well, thanks, Michael. And the next time we'll get into neoliberalism, I promise.
Yeah,
we can talk about Thomas Meadowcroft, that piece, the piece from Donaueschingen. We can talk about Mariana Ritchie and Andrea Moore and all those kinds of people. I still have to like learn a bit more about that. But it's an important topic. We could probably do a part 2 sometime we could get into.
Yeah, George Lewis and Michael next time. On neoliberalism.
If you can stand it.
Yeah. You know what I realized? I've seen myself cited a couple of times in like a bibliography, because your name, Lewis, Lewis, and Lewan is my, and then oftentimes Tanya Leon is like before that because she's Le, and so I often find myself sandwiched between like you and Tanya in bibliographies, and that always makes me really happy. So
that's a good neighborhood.
Anyway, Lewis and Lewanski on neoliberalism next time.
Yeah.
So anyway, George Lewis, it's a great pleasure to have you. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks a lot.